Welcome to Type Tune Tint. I'm Tom Kranz. Visiting more than 40 countries by age 26 was an unlikely future for young Kristen Van Nest while growing up in a troubled home in Connecticut. But the will to escape, the dream of becoming an international businesswoman, and a strong will to succeed came together, and that's just what she did. The former Fulbright scholar became a world traveler, and in so doing shaped her vision of the world and herself. Her new memoir, Where to Nest, is the true story of her travels as a young adventurer who learned a lot about life and love along the way. And I'm joined by Kristen Van Nest from her palatial estate in Los Angeles, California. And I'm here in Fanwood, New Jersey, where we are in the middle of a drought. So not that we would be watering our lawns anyway, but droughts are something that I think come and go from the West Coast anyway, because you guys have all your water problems out there. It's a pleasure to meet you, and good morning. It's very early where you are, isn't it?
Morning, yes. I'm a little drowsy, but I'm here and I'm excited.
All right, I'm always a little drowsy, so that's all good. We're here on the occasion of talking about Kristen's first book, Where to Nest. Notice the little play on her last name there, Kristen Van Nest. You're going to tell us what the ethnicity of that name is, but this book. If I had a thumbnail sketch, I would say it's kind of a young woman's global search for self and home, I guess. That's about as quick as I can come up with it. It's a memoir, so it's true. Just my thumbnail sketch is here at a young age. You were in your teens when you won a Fulbright scholarship, correct?
I was 22 when I did it. I think I applied when I was like around 21 maybe. And yeah, the Fulbright's an amazing program, and that's such a gift. And anyone, when they're like encouraging younger people, I'm like, apply for grants. If you can get the government to pay for you to travel, like do it.
And they did.
Yeah, it's a great program. I think it's very good for our country to have people who kind of have that chance to go abroad and experience other countries and meet other cultures. And so many Fulbrights go into so many different things. I don't know if mine's writing a memoir is as helpful, but a lot of them go into, protecting our country, working in foreign service and things like that are so essential. I mean, I guess I did international business, so that's also good for our country. So
what period of time are we talking about of your travels and the length of the Fulbright itself?
Yeah, the Fulbright was for 1 year and it was a research grant. And so I lived in Luxembourg for a year studying how they brand their country, because they're a very small country trapped between France and Germany, two huge powers. So I was very curious, and my research was on how do they brand themselves for business, politics, and tourism. Their officials have been the prime minister of the EU, and they have had these high roles, and they're very smart in how they think of positioning themselves as a country that's trapped between two huge powers that have historically fought each other a lot. Now the EU's in place, which was partially due to Luxembourg. So my grant was on that. But the great part about that is Luxembourg is in the middle of everything. So I could travel pretty much every other weekend to other parts of Europe very affordably. So I just gallivanted across Europe and had the best time for a year.
And I think Americans don't realize how easy that really is to do. I mean, if you have a passport and, you're not wanted by Interpol, you can pretty much cross borders and go any place you want. It's like going state to state to state.
Yeah, a lot of people with the book were like, oh, how could you afford this travel? That's very privileged. And it is privileged. But my kind of approach to travel was I will live in an area and then I will travel from that area, and using like EasyJet. I was doing what's it called? Crowd surfing in the beginning, which is where you literally just go and live on a stranger on the internet's sofa. You just sleep on that. So there are very affordable, if you love travel, there are very affordable ways to do it. And if you live in the region that you're traveling in, it's so much cheaper than, flying, from the US every time you're doing a trip.
So you had this vision of being kind of a global businesswoman is what I'm
Yes.
what I got from the book. And so you had this passion to travel, but you came from fairly modest beginnings, correct? Tell us where you're from
Yeah.
and what your early life was like.
Yeah, so I was born in Ohio and then we moved to Connecticut because my family was having trouble covering bills and my grandparents lived in Connecticut. So I grew up in one of the wealthiest towns in the United States, New Canaan. But my family moved there because of the great school system. So my mother rented our apartment from my grandmother who bought the apartment for us. And then I went to school. So it was kind of interesting because I was significantly poorer than everyone around me. And like my friends would have like pet horses and things like
Mm.
that. And like I would get like a graphing calculator for, Christmas because I needed it for school and that's all we could afford. Um, so it was very interesting. I felt kind of like, I don't know, a fox in the chicken coop sounds negative, but I felt very like an outsider, but kind of like seeing what's going on with the other half. And growing up in that environment was definitely eye opening and kind of shaped even when I travel and kind of how I view the world.
So do you attribute that as part of your incentive for wanting to see the world and wanting to travel and wanting to make good, I guess is the word I'm looking for here?
Yeah. So my grandmother was basically, I was kind of getting in with a bad crowd. And so she was like, I will pay for half of the cost for you to study abroad in Paris for a month. That was my first trip. And so I paid for the other half, making $10 an hour working in catering, being like, would you like some dim sum at every wedding in my hometown? And I lived in Paris for a month, studying at a school and living with the host family. And that was at 16. And I wasn't cool in my hometown. Like, I'm obsessed with cats. I say that in like currently, I'm still obsessed with cats.
Yes, I've
Speaking
seen
of,
some
my
of your
cat
posts.
just
Yeah,
meowed.
your
Yeah,
cat
my cat
posts.
just meowed. So I wasn't cool. And going abroad, I got to like see how all these different people live and be with people from all over the world. And I was like, wow, there's so much more than my little hometown
Mm.
going on. I definitely want to be a part of this. And so I was just completely hooked.
Did you feel like you wanted to escape your younger life? Was escape part
Yeah.
of all that?
Yes, definitely. My parents have a restraining order, and hate each other. So
Yes.
growing up was like not a house filled with a lot of love. There was a lot of like animosity. And so coming from that and coming from a town where I just was a completely different than everyone else, travel kind of gave me this chance to be whatever I wanted to be and get out of that. And I feel like we're so intensely captured in the bubble that we live in every day that travel kind of like shakes us out of that.
Hmm.
So even now as an adult, I always try and travel, and this has been my dream for a while and I've been doing it for a couple of years now, is I spend at least a month a year out of the country. Just to kind of clear my head because they say we're an average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. That can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing. And so I always think it's good to get out of your circle of friends and family and whoever is kind of your influence, just to kind of see another perspective. And when you come back, sometimes I'm like, I need to not be friends with this person anymore. Or sometimes I'm like, I'm so grateful for my partner. I miss them so much. It just kind of helps you kind of like gauge what's important in life.
So I made some notes of some of the things you said in your book so that I wouldn't forget. And what you're telling me now is that traveling is kind of part of who you are. But there's
Mm-hmm.
there's one passage here in which you say, this is you writing, despite traveling more than anyone else I knew, travel was never part of my identity. It was a thing I did for myself. I feel that travel made me a better person. Whenever I had returned to the US, I wouldn't talk about travel when I met people. So travel does seem like it actually is part of your identity now. So have you kind of evolved beyond this out of context sentence I picked here?
Yeah, I guess so. I think because I've spent so much of my life living abroad, I'm now like, I would call it culturally confused. Like, I'm very into feng shui. There's like little things that it's like, why is she like this? But I find that sometimes if you come in and you're just like only talking about travel, it can kind of alienate people. Because it is a privileged thing that, a lot of people don't really get to travel so much. So it's it can be something where people have trouble connecting. And if you tell these wild stories off the bat, it's kind of hard to engage and like meet people where they are and learn about the other person.
Another thing I got from the book, which is ironically one of the things that kept me reading, was you seem to, I don't know if attracted to chaos is what I'm really looking for. You seem to not shy away from situations that could be fraught. Like you mentioned briefly, sleeping on some stranger's couch. And there were a couple instances where you literally shared a bed with somebody who you barely knew. And I don't mean for sex, I mean just to sleep, because that's what was available. Forget it. I tried that once when I was 8 years old and I got out in the middle of the night and went looking for my mom. But there's a quote here that I also made note of in which you say, nothing made me feel more alive than the adrenaline rush of trying to get into and finding my way out of unique and awkward situations. And damn, you did that a few times in this book here. What's that about?
I think for me, I love having experiences that other people haven't had. Like my least favorite cities are maybe Bangkok would probably be my least favorite city, which is a beautiful city, but it is designed for tourists. It is a tourist trap. And by that, I mean you're in a maze where every single way you turn, someone is trying to sell you something.
Hmm.
Um, so I love kind of getting off the beaten path, but getting off the beaten path means there is no path. And so
Hmm.
you don't know where you're going to end up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you spent the largest period of time in Shanghai. Is that correct?
Yes, I
So
lived
you
there for
lived
three
there
and a
for
half
like
years.
three, right, over 3 years. And
Yeah.
that was, in itself, geez, let's move to China, where not only do I not speak the language, but, it's a communist country and they got, you can't post anything on the internet and you can only have one kid and all this stuff. But you seem to speak both mostly fondly about that, but you had a couple of not so great experiences there. But again, from your book, you write living in China meant stripping away all the things familiar, social norms, everyday routines, and cultural expectations. By forcing myself to adapt to a place where nothing was expected of me, I went through the cathartic process of rebuilding my identity from the ground up. There were zero expectations of me. Why was it necessary for you to rebuild your identity from the ground up? I mean, you were
Mm,
only in your early 20s at the time. What did you see your identity as, and why did you think you needed to rebuild it?
that's a great question. I did the Fulbright and then so I lived abroad in Luxembourg for a year and then I returned to the US to New York and most of my friends, I graduated a year early from college. I graduated 3 years instead of four. So most of my adult friends are from high school because I didn't really have like a full college experience. And so I went back to kind of the patterns and friendships of my youth, as in high school. And I think for me, I was like, this doesn't fit me. It didn't fit me then, and it doesn't fit me now. But then what does fit me was kind of the bigger
So
question.
you were striving to
Um,
be an adult, basically, is what it sounds like.
yeah, yes. And I think also, at the time I was like, oh, I want to be an international businesswoman. I want to like, climb the corporate ladder. And that's very different from my life now. Now I have a copywriting business and I'm pursuing and, write every day. So I think for me, it was kind of like, well, what's the next path? And then I finally achieved that kind of, oh, I'm managing people. I'm, serious. I'm in an office. I have budget. And then being like, wait a second, none of this. I don't want any of this.
Hmm.
So I have that rebuilding kind of in my life, that rebuilding happens every 3 years. Maybe it's because I have ADHD and I get bored. But I think at that moment I was like, I don't know fully what I want. And I have kind of framed my life and purpose around others. How should I react? How do I fit in?
Hmm.
There was a constant, this person wants this from me. How
I
do I
got you.
make sure I give it
Sure.
to them? And so then it was like, wait, but what do I actually want?
Sure. Do for yourself instead of the other 43 people who are tugging at you. Yeah,
Yes.
that's something that I think a lot of us go through. You had the fortune of going through it by exploring different countries and meeting all these different people. So Shanghai was a highlight, but you also had a couple of lowlights there. There was one incident that you talk about at length in which a coworker essentially nearly sexually assaulted you when you guys shared a hotel room. And the name the name you gave him was Dong. Did you do that on purpose?
Yes.
Jesus. It's like, wow.
I wanted that story. So we talked about editing that story because it was very long. But I wanted the story to not, like, normally, right, you set up foreshadowing and then an event occurs. But because of the nature in fiction, when you're writing about assault, you would want to hint at how the character's like, whatever. But in reality, it's because assault can occur because two people are in a private setting
Mhm.
and you enter a private setting with someone because of trust. So if there's foreshadowing, you are less likely to have that happen.
Mhm.
But it happens. And so I wanted to set the story up how these kind of things actually happen, where the beginning of the chapter is very fun and very funny. And then this horrible thing happens.
Well, I mean, to me, it was like an example of the vulnerability that you were willing to show as a writer. And I didn't get that that whole thing was too long. To me, it really illustrated why this is such a horrible thing. I mean, all the details and the way it unfolded, and then what happened later on, and dealing with the HR people and questioning, why did you guys share a room to begin? All this stuff, that probably has happened in different forms about a trillion times to women all over the world, right? So I kind of got
Yeah.
that. You also, you and your friend, there was a female friend at the time who you got checkups, and one of you were diagnosed with HPV, but she
Yes.
wasn't. And the reason I bring this up is because that chapter just riveted me because of all the different names you came up with. The private area that the freaking doctors, and I made a list, and I'm going to do this to embarrass the shit out of you. So you talked about my unclean bearded clam, our meat curtains. That's a new one. Our juice boxes. The doctor peered into my humid climate. That's very lovely. My penis flytrap, which is my personal favorite, my cave of wonders, my hoo-ha, my pink taco, my snatch, that's old school, and my hot pocket. So this all came in the course of like 3 pages. And I said, wow, did you actually like stay up in the middle of the night and come up with those names, or do you actually use those words in your daily conversation? You don't even need
Oh
to
my
really answer
gosh.
that question. It amused the shit out of me, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Well, yeah, I got a review that was like, it was like 4 stars. And it was like, I love the book, but there was one chapter where she came up with all these phrases for your
Yes,
privates. And I was
yes.
very uncomfortable. And I
Oh,
was
poor
like,
baby.
well, if I use the word vagina like 50 times, I'm pretty sure you'd be significantly more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I was like, I will just add different words to make it kind of fun. Um,
It was
and
funny. It was amusing. It kept me going. I said, wow, what's she going to come up with next? How can you beat my penis flytrap? It's freaking Hall of Fame right there.
on different cultures and snatch, a friend of a friend got a little puppy in China, and he loves baseball, so he named the dog Snatch because of
Yikes.
like how you snatch, you throw the
Sure.
ball for the dog and then you
Yeah.
snatch it. And it was like, do we tell him or do we just let him name his dog Snatch? I don't know what the moral code is there.
Probably none. All right. We're going to talk in a minute about your process for writing a memoir. I started writing a memoir and I decided I better make this fiction because I don't want my ass to get sued. But we're going to talk about your writing process and how long this took and how you did it when we come back following this 1 minute of shameless self promotion for one of my books. Be back shortly with Kristen Van Nest, folks. Don't go away.
After 20 years as a volunteer EMT, Griffin Ambrose helped scores of patients in a small New Jersey town. But a crashed ambulance, a dead patient, an injured partner, and a drunk driving charge sent him to jail and then exile from EMS. But is it possible that the good he did over 20 years might create a path to redemption? Find out by reading Wreck and Return, a novel based on fact by Tom Kranz. Available in all formats at Amazon.
And I'm back with Kristen Van Nest from Los Angeles, and we've talked about some of her world travels in her new book, Where to Nest. And the title there is kind of telegraphs a little bit of the theme, which is kind of her search in her 20s for herself, where to kind of nest permanently. She obviously ended up in Los Angeles, but you wrote this as a memoir, so it's nonfiction. Everything in this book actually happened. How long did it take you to do? When did you decide to write it? Did you write it as you went along, as you traveled to all these places? Did you take notes, or did you come back and just sit down and vomit the whole book out onto your computer?
Yeah. So, I didn't know that I wanted to write this or be a writer, and the story takes place over 10 years. So when I moved to LA, I was writing, acting, directing, and then COVID hit. And so it was like, okay, so I can't direct or act. I can only write. So I took a memoir writing class with Upright Citizens Brigade and Margot Lightman, who's an amazing teacher. And I wrote the proposal, and then, luckily I found an agent and I found a publisher. And so, I wrote the book. In my proposal, I asked for 6 months. I wrote it in 4. And how
So this
I wrote
was
it is,
after the fact. This was after you'd done all this traveling, and
yeah.
so you had to remember all this.
So some chapters are more detailed than others if you look very closely, because
Sure.
some they were kind of like essays that I knew I wanted to write, but I wasn't in the writing space, so I didn't know how to pitch them. I didn't know how to really like get them published. So some of them are more detailed, like the when I go into Changzhou for Chinese New Year with a friend. That one I actually hired a researcher in China to help me research components, because I was seeing a ghost city and kind of how old China met new China. And so I wanted to understand economically how this whole city that I was in went from, in my friend's grandmother's generation, agrarian, like not Monsanto, agrarian, like digging with your hands, to a modern city that's like completely advanced, and her grandmother living in an apartment next to all of the other people that they all used to be farmers next to. Like, how do you move a whole town of farmers into an apartment building? I was like, what is going on? So some of the cities, some of them are more detailed because I had notes and things like that. If you look closely, the earlier chapters when I'm in my 20s, I was drunk during all those things. Like, that's what you're doing back then. So, those chapters are definitely less detailed than some of the later ones. And yeah, like I feel like some of them, it was just kind of like stories that I had told over and over again. And then luckily others, I had some notes and things like that. One where I'm traveling, I'm getting over a breakup, and in Greece during Brexit, their government shut down because of their banking crisis.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty extensive. That's an extensive chapter. I especially like the part where you're on the so-called yacht, and then suddenly you're swimming and little turds are coming by, because it was like, yikes, that was quite a story.
That's my favorite chapter of the book, is that one.
I can tell.
It's just like a very odd situation to being trapped on a boat in on a yacht in the Mediterranean with everyone else is from Florida, is like, you can't plan that. When people are like, oh, when you travel now, can you plan? I can't plan. I don't think you can plan a good story. I mean, you can make things funny, you can make situations funny, but good stories have, tension, and they have people fighting usually. And a great travel trip has none of that. A great travel trip, you're eating great things, you're having great food. So yeah, it's hard to like plan a good story, and that I don't even know how you plan that.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, you called it a yacht, but what's your cat's name?
Oh, Nala, after the best Disney princess. My book's
Oh,
dedicated
of
to
course.
her.
Yeah. Well, she can be part of this if you want. So, so it took you, you said 4 months to write?
Yes, I write every morning for
That's
two
pretty quick. Yeah.
hours.
If you do that, yeah, I have no discipline whatsoever. It takes me almost a year to write a novel because I sit down. I have even a worse attention span. I get bored after 20 minutes. But it served me well, especially in retirement. It's kept me from robbing liquor stores and kept me out of trouble. Basically, kept me mostly from watching CNN, which I do less and less of now, especially since the
Oh,
election.
doom
But that's
watching.
yeah,
Yeah.
forget it. That's a whole different podcast. Um, so what are your do you have plans for this book other than, kind of it reads to me like this would make like a great, like a Netflix movie or a miniseries. Is that kind of a plan for you for this?
I would love to. The problem is because it takes place in so many cities, it would be very expensive
You mean to
to
shoot just
create.
logistically?
Yeah, logistically. So my hope is that if I could find like the yachting chapter, I think would make a great like Vicky Cristina Barcelona kind of movie. So if I could find ways to use parts of the IP, that would be a dream for me. And yeah, so that's kind of how I'm looking at that. And then I am writing fiction currently for, with the goal of turning it into TV and film, short stories right now.
So the clips I've seen that you put up on your website, it looks like little clips are those TV shows, movies, both? What are they that we're looking at? Because they're not really labeled.
Oh yeah. So some of them I've been on TVs and commercials, and then on the acting side. And then I used to run pre-COVID a YouTube channel that I built from like 200 to 10,000 followers, which were comedic sketches. And
Okay.
so there I would write, act, and direct the sketches.
Is that the one? Oh, so the sketches where you're dressed up as this funny looking lady there, and
Oh
that's
yeah,
you.
Long Island.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. Long
That's
Island
that's
Marie
from that.
Kondo. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
Yeah,
are you,
yes.
and do you, so did you move to LA because you thought this was part of your future to be in performing, or you just ended up there because you ended up there?
I visited on a family trip for Christmas with my dad and brother, and I took an improv class, and there were two Disney princesses in my class, like full time Elsa and Mulan at Disneyland.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't know if I want to be a princess, but apparently in LA, you can be whatever you want. So I was like, I'm kind of over Shanghai. I had a great time there, but I'm kind of done living there. That chapter's ready to end. And LA seemed like a fun, exciting next place. So I came over here, and when I started, I was doing more on the performing side, improv, stand up. And then mainly due to COVID, I kind of shifted into writing, and then I sold a book, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I guess people will pay me to do this. So that's nice. Maybe I'm good enough at this to try this. So I'm kind of focused on the writing now, and I would love to go back to the performing and the directing. But I think my gateway into that will be writing things for TV and film.
Well, I'm still hearing about people whose lives changed because of COVID, who adapted their art, their artistry, their whatever they did. I've talked to more than one writer who, COVID was actually a good thing for their creativity because it forced them to sit down and write at a computer and kind of focus on that. So writing is your
Yeah.
thing going forward now, you think, huh?
Yeah. I had a mentor, Joanna Johnson. She created The Fosters and the TV show Good Trouble. And she was a star on Bold and the Beautiful. And she was like, you can do all the things. You can write, act, direct, but you have to be really good at one of them.
Mm.
And then they'll let you do the rest, which for her was being a soap star. But she got bored of being a soap star, and then she wanted to write about her experiences, and that's how she wrote The Fosters and Good Trouble. So she gave me that advice, and then COVID forced me to take that advice. And I'm sticking to it. So I don't really do the performing and directing right now. I just focus on the writing. And hopefully, as I write different things, I can be like, oh, can I play this small role if someone's making it? Or like, could I shadow the director? Hopefully there are ways that I can kind of build the other skills and have that gateway into it, due to my writing.
At the end of the book, you talk about, finally coming home and feeling comfortable in Los Angeles and finally being comfortable in this apartment you had in Koreatown, I guess. Is that the apartment you're living in now, or did you move since then?
No, I have a boyfriend now. Yay. um, so my partner and I live in West Hollywood now.
With everything that you're good at, it seems like you're in a good spot right now, and it's getting better. We'll look for when do you think your next book will be done? Do you have a timetable for that or no?
Well, right now my next project is writing short horror stories. So basically writing the book, it took me 4 years from writing the proposal, getting an agent, getting a publisher, having the book come out. And so as a writer, I'm like, well, 4 years for one IP doesn't seem like a way that I can like create a lot. So I've kind of shifted as my next project, and I'm going to be writing short horror stories. And the reason horror is because I love like my book kind of covers what it was like growing up as a millennial. I want to write about interesting things that are happening right now and how the world's changing. So I want to write horror that really reflects modern technology and modern problems that society is dealing with. Like,
wow,
is it okay to cut out a family member? That kind of views on that are changing. What is the role of women? Like, these are things that I think horror is like a fun way to play with that. But so my next project, I'm going to audio record them on YouTube and podcast channels. And then I will also put them up on Wattpad, Web Novel, and some other sites, and kind of self-publish them that way, and give them kind of directly to the audience instead of going through traditional publishing or another method. I think it's faster, and it lets me focus on the fun of like the story versus like the editing of how should we say this? Like, I kind of like the like building the world component. And so my next project, I'm kind of experimenting with that, which goes back to looking at the entertainment industry and what I was just saying about how technology is changing. And so we don't have to just write books. We can, they used to put interviews like this in books, but now you can have podcasts and you can have all these different ways of sharing story. And so I'm pushing myself to also think about, okay, well, what technology's out there and how can I become an author and be a creative and use all the technology that's there? Because if I love writing, I don't need it to be traditionally published. As long as it's good and people enjoy it, I can publish it in other ways.
Oh, that's my philosophy. I've self-published all 7 of my books, and I love doing it. I love the writing, and some of them are actually good. Maybe not all of them, but some are. All right. Speaking of technology, let's make sure we cover all the bases where you are. So your website is kristenvannest.com. Is that Dutch, your name, by the way, or what?
Yes.
kristenvannest.com. What are your social media platforms of choice? Where do you hang out the most?
Yeah, my handle is at Kristen Van Nest, just my name, on every platform. And I'd say the ones I spend, probably Instagram's the one I spend the most time on, and YouTube. I love YouTube.
And that's where I found all of your stuff, especially Instagram. You post a lot there.
Yes, and I'll be posting my like horror stories on YouTube as well, which I'll read aloud. So if you hate my voice, don't.
Where do we get your book? Do we find your book in all the usual places?
Yeah, Amazon's the best place. I love the audiobook if you're into that, because I read it. So if all the jokes I wrote are read the way that I intended for them to be performed, I guess. So again, if you hate my voice, don't do that. But the audiobooks are a really fun way to kind of like hear the stories.
No, that's great. I tried voicing one of my own audiobooks once because I started my life in radio and I had a decent voice, but I just could not, once again, sitting down there and reading 70,000 words over whatever period of time, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So I admire you for doing that on top of everything else. But Kristen, I really appreciate you getting up at the early hour of 7 a.m. West Coast time to do this interview. It's great to meet you. I met you a little bit in reading your book, but you seem to have a lot on the ball and you're a smart person. And I look forward to everything that you're doing in the future. I appreciate it. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you.